What if the most dangerous scandal in the modern royal era didn't explode with shouting headlines, but slipped into the public conversation quietly, calmly, almost politely? What if it wasn't leaked by a tabloid, whispered by an anonymous source, or teased in a blind item, but allegedly acknowledged in a way so subtle that most people missed its true weight? And what if, when the dust settled, the person left standing in stunned silence wasn't the public, but Prince Harry himself? That is the question hanging over the internet right now. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because over the last few days, something unusual happened. Not loud, not chaotic, not even immediately viral, but unsettling in a way that seasoned royal watchers recognized instantly. A statement, a report, a reference, depending on which outlet you read, linked to Saudi power circles began circulating. And inside that language was a phrase that sent shockwaves through royal forums, Hollywood group chats, and diplomatic whisper networks alike. 2 words: paid, yacht. And suddenly, a rumor that many believed had been buried years ago clawed its way back into relevance, this time with global consequences. Now let's be very clear before we go any further. This story is not about proven facts. It is not about courtroom evidence. It is not about definitive confirmation. It is about claims, reactions, silences, contradictions, and timing. Because in the modern era, perception doesn't wait for proof. It moves faster, louder, and often more destructively. So ask yourself this: why now? Why would allegations that have circulated for years, mostly dismissed as internet noise, suddenly resurface with renewed intensity? Why would Saudi-linked language enter a narrative that had, until now, lived primarily in gossip columns and online forums? And why, perhaps most chilling of all, did the people who usually respond fastest hesitate? Because hesitation, in high-profile crises, is never accidental. The internet didn't erupt at first. It froze. For nearly 24 hours, headlines contradicted each other. Some claimed confirmation. Others claimed misinterpretation. A few carefully avoided repeating the language at all. Social media timelines filled with screenshots, half-quotes, and speculative threads that ended not with conclusions, but with questions. And that's when seasoned observers noticed something else. Prince Harry was silent, not issuing a denial, not expressing outrage, not even signaling indignation through a spokesperson. Just silence. And silence, in this context, felt deafening. Now, if you followed royal controversies long enough, you know this pattern. Silence can mean many things: strategic restraint, legal caution, or something far more unsettling: shock. Because when someone is prepared for an attack, they respond quickly. When someone is blindsided, they pause. So let's rewind. This story didn't begin with Saudi Arabia. It didn't begin with a crown prince. And it certainly didn't begin this week. It began years ago, in the murky overlap between Hollywood ambition, elite social circles, and the kind of luxury spaces the public never sees. Private yachts, invitation-only parties, networking environments where influence is exchanged in whispers, not contracts. For most people, yachts represent fantasy, leisure, escape. For elites, yachts are something else entirely. They are mobile power rooms. No cameras, no press, no paper trails. A place where conversations happen without witnesses and relationships form without documentation. For years, stories circulated online suggesting that certain aspiring actresses, models, and influencers were present in these environments. Not as guests, but as part of a transactional social ecosystem. These stories were always framed vaguely. Allegedly, sources say, according to insiders. And because there was never direct proof, they remained in the shadows. Until now. Because the word that reignited everything wasn't yacht. It was paid. That word changed the interpretation instantly. Paid implies transaction. Transaction implies intent. And intent implies accountability. But here's where things get complicated. In elite circles, paid does not always mean what the public assumes. Paid can mean appearance fees. Paid can mean sponsored attendance. Paid can mean hospitality arrangements that never involve direct money transfers. And yet, when that word appears next to a name as globally recognized as Meghan Markle, the reaction becomes explosive. Why? Because narratives stick. And Meghan Markle, more than almost any public figure of the last decade, exists inside a battlefield of narratives. To supporters, she is a victim of relentless scrutiny, sexism, and institutional coldness. To critics, she is a master of image management, strategically navigating power structures for advancement. This story threatens to fuel both interpretations simultaneously, and that's what makes it dangerous. Now let's talk about timing. Why would this resurface now? Look at the broader context. Prince Harry and Meghan are navigating declining public favor in key markets. Media projects face increased scrutiny. Commercial partnerships are no longer guaranteed, and the couple's narrative, once centered on escape and empowerment, has slowly shifted toward defense and justification. At the same time, geopolitical power players are more vocal, more visible, and less constrained by Western media sensitivities than ever before. This creates a volatile intersection: celebrity, royalty, global power. And when those worlds collide, stories don't behave normally. They don't fade quietly. They either explode or linger like poison. So when a Saudi-linked acknowledgement, however carefully worded, appeared to reference yacht-related arrangements, analysts didn't ask whether it was true. They asked why it was said at all. Because powerful people don't speak casually. Every word is chosen. Every omission is intentional. Every silence is strategic. Which brings us back to Harry. Because if Meghan is at the center of this storm, Harry is standing in its outer ring, watching narratives form in real time about the woman he defended, the life he left behind, and the truth he thought he knew. Imagine that position. The world speculating, the internet dissecting, media pundits circling, and your own past decisions suddenly reframed through a lens you never anticipated. What does it feel like to realize that a rumor you dismissed years ago is now being discussed on a global stage? What does it feel like to question not just public perception, but private certainty? And what does it mean when the story refuses to die? Because here's another unsettling detail. Normally, stories like this are crushed quickly. Lawyers intervene. Statements are issued. Media outlets retreat. But this one didn't collapse. It stalled. And stalled stories are far more dangerous than debunked ones, because they invite interpretation. And interpretation fills gaps with imagination. Now ask yourself this. If this story were completely false, why hasn't it been extinguished? If it were entirely fabricated, why hasn't it unraveled under scrutiny? And if it were partially true, which part matters most? The yacht? The payment? Or the silence? Because history shows us something important. The most damaging scandals are rarely the ones that are proven. They are the ones that remain unresolved. And unresolved narratives don't just haunt public figures. They erode trust privately. Which leads us to the question no one wants to ask out loud. What if Harry didn't know everything? What if the woman he defended against the world carried chapters of her past that were never fully explained? And what if the shock wasn't public humiliation, but personal realization? That's the uncomfortable space this story occupies. Not accusation, but doubt. And doubt is corrosive. Now, as we move forward in this story, we're not here to declare guilt or innocence. We're here to follow the trail, to examine the language, to analyze the timing, to dissect the reactions, and to understand why this particular rumor refuses to disappear. Because something changed, and it didn't change loudly. It changed quietly, behind the scenes, where reputations are weighed and futures recalculated. We're going to examine the moment everything shifted, the statement, the wording, and the single detail that turned a recycled rumor into a global conversation. Because once you see how carefully it was phrased, you'll understand why insiders say this wasn't an accident at all. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive with flashing headlines or urgent breaking news banners. It appeared quietly, almost politely. The kind of language most people skim past without realizing they've just read something explosive. And that's exactly why it mattered. Because when power speaks softly, it expects to be heard by the right people. The moment that reignited everything did not come from a tabloid scoop or an anonymous blogger chasing clicks. It came from what insiders describe as a carefully worded acknowledgement, attributed to Saudi-linked commentary. That referenced private yacht gatherings, compensation, and social arrangements in a way that was neither a denial nor an accusation. It sat in the uncanny middle. And in crisis communication, that middle ground is lethal. Here's why. When a rumor is denied outright, it loses oxygen. When it's confirmed explicitly, it becomes a scandal with a lifespan. But when it's acknowledged indirectly, with legal ambiguity and diplomatic phrasing, it becomes immortal. That is what happened here. The phrasing did not accuse Meghan Markle of wrongdoing. It did not describe explicit behavior. It did not sensationalize. Instead, it used language that suggested awareness of paid hospitality environments, social engagements, and elite yacht settings, without naming dates, actions, or terms. To the average reader, it sounded like nothing. To analysts, it sounded like everything. Because powerful institutions do not reference rumors unless those rumors already exist within their internal awareness. And the moment that reference appeared, royal correspondents noticed something chilling. No one rushed to correct it. Not immediately. Media outlets hesitated. Spokespeople paused. Legal teams went quiet. That hesitation created a vacuum. And vacuums fill fast. Let's slow this down and examine why that specific phrasing sent shockwaves through insider circles. In elite diplomacy and high-level public relations, every sentence is constructed like a chess move. Words are chosen not just for meaning, but for implication. What is omitted is often more important than what is included. And this statement, or acknowledgement, depending on interpretation, contained three critical elements that changed everything. First, it did not dismiss the existence of yacht-based social environments. Second, it acknowledged compensation frameworks without defining them. Third, it avoided moral judgment entirely. That combination is rare, because if a claim is false, institutions deny the environment itself. If a claim is true but sensitive, they deny the behavior. If a claim is dangerous, they deny everything. Here, none of that happened. Instead, the language floated. And floating language invites interpretation. Now here's where the story turns. Within hours of that wording circulating, online researchers began digging. Old screenshots resurfaced. Archived forum posts were reposted. Blind items from years earlier were suddenly reinterpreted through a new lens. And something unsettling emerged. The details matched. Not perfectly, but enough to raise eyebrows. Dates aligned loosely with known travel windows. Social circles overlapped with documented connections. Luxury maritime locations appeared in old social photos, previously dismissed as coincidence. Coincidence is comforting. Patterns are not. At this point, you might be asking yourself something important. Why didn't this explode immediately? Because powerful stories don't detonate until they are ready. What followed was not chaos, but calculation. Certain outlets reported cautiously. Others refused to touch it. A few framed it as misinterpretation. And some used the safest word in media language, allegedly. But behind the scenes, sources say phone lines were lighting up. Not with outrage, but with verification requests. Editors asking lawyers. Agents calling PR consultants. Publicists reviewing timelines. And that's when another critical moment occurred. Someone close to the situation reportedly asked a simple question. Should we deny this? The answer, allegedly, was not immediate. Because denial carries risk. A denial locks you into a position. A silence buys time. And time, in moments like this, is everything. Now let's talk about why Saudi-linked acknowledgement carried such weight. Saudi leadership is not known for casual commentary on Western celebrity rumors. They do not gain from inserting themselves into tabloid discourse. When their language appears in global narratives, it usually serves a strategic function. So analysts asked, what function does this serve? Possibilities emerged quickly. Was it a message to Hollywood power brokers? Was it a response to prior narratives? Was it reputational distancing? Or was it simply a careless phrasing that escaped tighter control? Here's the unsettling truth. Careless phrasing at that level is rare, which means the phrasing was either intentional or tolerated. And both options carry consequences. Because once acknowledged, even indirectly, the rumor gained legitimacy in the eyes of those who matter most, decision makers. Not the public, the gatekeepers. And this is where Prince Harry's silence becomes impossible to ignore. Because while Meghan's public response patterns have always been strategic, Harry's have historically been emotional. When attacked, he reacts. When offended, he responds. When hurt, he speaks. But this time, nothing. Sources claim he was processing. Processing what? That's the question. Was he blindsided by the resurgence? Was he advised to wait? Or was he confronting something privately that he couldn't address publicly? Because silence from someone known for vocal defense suggests internal conflict. And internal conflict suggests uncertainty. Now here's a contradiction that analysts found troubling. If this story were baseless, a swift, strong denial would have crushed it. The longer silence persisted, the more credibility the story gained by default. That's not public logic. That's crisis logic. And crisis logic follows one rule above all others. Never deny what can be disproven later. So let's pause and ask a direct question. Why would anyone hesitate to deny something unless denial itself posed a risk? That question haunted commentators. Meanwhile, the language of the original acknowledgement continued to be dissected. Why mention payment structures at all? Why not simply state ignorance? Why not distance completely? Because acknowledgement implies familiarity, and familiarity implies proximity. At this point, the narrative split into camps. One camp argued this was a misunderstanding, a careless reference blown out of proportion. The other camp believed this was a controlled release, designed not to accuse, but to remind. A reminder of what? Of past arrangements, of shared knowledge, of stories that powerful people already know. And if that's true, then this wasn't about Meghan alone. It was about leverage. Because stories like this are rarely told for the public. They are told for insiders. Now let's address another unsettling detail. No legal threats appeared immediately. No cease and desist letters leaked. No aggressive rebuttals emerged. That delay mattered. Because in previous controversies, legal responses came fast. Here, they didn't. Which raised a disturbing possibility. What if legal teams were reviewing exposure rather than refuting claims? What if the concern wasn't reputation, but verification? Because denying something that can later be corroborated is worse than staying silent. And that brings us back to the phrasing again. The acknowledgement didn't say Meghan did anything wrong.